$30. 3 days. That's all I need. Nathan Cole stopped pushing the mop mid-stroke, the gray water sloshing against the bucket's rim. The girl standing in the empty hallway of Coldwell Tower couldn't have been older than 10, her coat 2 sizes too big, one sneaker held together with duct tape where the other one still had its laces. But what stopped him wasn't how she looked. It was the way she stared straight at him, steady and unblinking, like someone who had already heard enough no's to stop flinching at the idea of one more. If you liked what you just heard, stay with me, because this story only gets bigger from here. And if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe to Winter Veil right now so you don't miss where it goes. Winter has always felt like a season of quiet honesty to me, the kind of cold that strips everything down to what actually matters. And this story came from thinking about a little girl who kept believing in warmth even when the world around her had gone frozen. I hope you feel that warmth too before the end. She held out her hand, fingers wrapped tight around a few crumpled bills and some loose change like they were the last thing she owned in the world. I don't need a real dad, she said again, calmer this time. Just somebody for 3 days. Nathan blinked, glancing down the hallway to make sure this wasn't some kind of setup, some prank cooked up by the office kids upstairs. Kid, he said slowly, what exactly are you talking about? She sighed the way a person sighs when they've had to explain something too many times for someone her age. School thing, she said. Career day? Parents come in and talk about their jobs, and everybody already knows my mom runs this whole building. So if I show up with nobody, or if I show up and everyone stares at me because of who she is, I'd rather just not go at all. She looked at him a moment longer. You kind of look like the guy I draw in my notebook. That's why I picked you. Nathan didn't answer right away. He just watched her dig into a backpack covered in marker doodles and pull out a piece of notebook paper, folded into fourths, soft at the creases like it had been unfolded and refolded 100 times. On it was a pencil drawing of a tall man in a flannel shirt, big hands, kind eyes, holding the hand of a small girl standing in falling snow. That's my dad, she said simply. The one I made up. Nathan looked down at his own flannel sleeve, rolled to the elbow, at his rough, cracked hands. The resemblance wasn't exact, but it was close enough to sting somewhere behind his ribs. What's your name? He asked finally. Ivy, she said, chin lifting slightly. Ivy Whitmore. She said it like she was daring him to make something of it, like the last name alone should have meant something to him, though at the time it didn't. Nathan rubbed the back of his neck, the mop forgotten against the wall. I've got a kid myself, he said. Doesn't live with me right now. It's complicated. Ivy shrugged like complications were something she understood better than most adults gave her credit for. This doesn't have to change anything, she said. 3 days, we're even, and you never have to see me again if you don't want to. Something in the plainness of the way she said it made him pause longer than he meant to. She wasn't crying. She wasn't performing sadness the way kids sometimes did to get what they wanted. It was the tone underneath it, the tone of someone who had learned not to expect anything, but who kept asking anyway, quietly, just in case the universe surprised her one more time. Nathan had absolutely no business getting involved in whatever this was. He was a 34-year-old janitor working the night shift in a glass tower he didn't belong in, a man who hadn't returned his sister's calls in weeks, who missed his son so much some nights it felt like a physical weight sitting on his chest. But this girl, standing in front of him with a backpack full of doodles and a fistful of crumpled dollar bills, was offering him something strange. Not a con, not a joke, a chance. And maybe that was exactly what scared him. All right, he said finally, and something in his own voice surprised him. 3 days. But I don't do bedtime stories, I don't do hugs on command, and I definitely don't do glitter. Ivy's mouth twitched into the first real smile he'd seen from her. Deal, she said, and stuck out her hand like she was closing a business contract, which, in a way, she was. The next morning, Nathan found himself walking through the front doors of Ivy's school for the first time in his life, hand in hand with a child who technically wasn't his. She guided him through the hallway like a small, serious tour manager. Don't say anything weird, she warned under her breath, and try to look like you actually want to be here. Nathan scoffed quietly. You're the one who hired me, remember? But if he was honest with himself, he felt like a fraud the whole walk down that corridor. His shirt was clean, pressed even, but it still carried the faint chemical smell of the industrial cleaner he used every night on the marble floors upstairs. His work boots thudded heavy and out of place against the school's polished tile, like they knew they didn't belong there, no matter how carefully he tried to walk. They reached the classroom just as a teacher with sharp glasses and her hair pulled back too tightly turned to greet them at the door. "You must be Ivy's father," she said, her tone polite but clearly unconvinced. Nathan gave a short nod, feeling Ivy's small hand tighten around his fingers. "Yeah," he said, "I'm here." And even though every nerve in his body told him to turn around and walk out, he stayed, because sometimes just showing up is the only thing that actually counts. The classroom smelled like dry erase markers and old carpet, the kind of room where time seemed permanently stuck somewhere between a spelling test and the lunch bell. Nathan folded himself awkwardly into a chair built for someone half his size while the teacher, Mrs. Foley, flipped through a folder of Ivy's work. "She's sharp," she said. "Writes like she's years older than she is. But she keeps to herself. Always looks like she's waiting for something." Nathan didn't know how to respond to that, so he glanced sideways at Ivy, who was staring hard at her own shoes, tapping one foot against the chair leg like she wanted the whole conversation to be over already. "We're working on that," he heard himself say, and it came out more honest than he'd intended, like some part of him actually meant it. Afterward, walking down a hallway lined with crooked art projects and motivational posters gone soft at the corners, Nathan noticed a man standing near the front office in a charcoal overcoat. Clearly not a teacher, clearly not a parent either. Something about how still he stood, how out of place his polish looked against the chaos of backpacks and squeaking sneakers, made the back of Nathan's neck prickle. "You know that guy?" he asked Ivy quietly. She glanced over her shoulder, then quickly looked away. "Nope," she said, a beat too fast. "Probably just someone from downtown." But her shoulders had gone stiff, and the way her voice dipped told Nathan it wasn't just probably anything. He didn't push it, not yet, but something about the whole morning had started to feel like walking on ice that hadn't fully frozen over, thin in places he hadn't yet stepped. That afternoon they sat in a small diner with chipped mugs and sticky laminated menus, snow starting to drift lazily past the window in fat, unhurried flakes. Ivy poked at her grilled cheese like it had personally wronged her. "You said you had a kid," she muttered eventually. Nathan nodded. "Yeah, Tommy. He's 8. Lives with my sister right now. It's complicated, like I said." "Do you see him?" Ivy asked, not looking up from her plate. Nathan took a long sip of his coffee before answering. "Used to. Not lately." She didn't ask why. She just went back to picking at her sandwich, and Nathan found himself watching her more closely, realizing that this strange, composed little girl who'd hired him off a mop bucket was carrying weight no 10-year-old should have to carry alone. Weight he recognized because he was carrying a version of it himself. The waitress, an older woman with a gravel voice named Sandra, refilled his coffee without being asked and lingered a beat longer than necessary, glancing between Nathan and Ivy with the kind of quiet curiosity small diners specialize in. "Your girl's got good manners," she said. "Not many kids say thank you for grilled cheese anymore." Ivy looked up, startled, like the compliment had landed somewhere unfamiliar, then mumbled a quiet thanks of her own before returning to her sandwich. Nathan didn't correct Sandra. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because correcting it would have meant explaining a story too complicated for a diner counter, or maybe because some small, unguarded part of him liked the sound of it more than he expected to. Ivy noticed the choice not to correct her either, filing it away silently the way she seemed to file everything away, storing small proofs of decency, like coins in a jar she wasn't sure she'd ever get to spend. Outside, snow had started falling harder, fat flakes catching gold under the diner's window lights, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything at all, just watched the storm build over rooftops and parked cars, comfortable in a silence that felt oddly earned rather than empty. "It's supposed to get worse tonight," Ivy said eventually. "Mrs. Alvarez says storms like this always mean something's about to change." Nathan didn't know if he believed that, but he didn't argue with her either. They walked back after the sun had dropped low and orange behind the buildings, the cold sharpening with every block, snow catching in Ivy's hair like she'd been dusted with sugar. She led him not toward some modest apartment complex, but toward the base of a glass tower Nathan knew far too well, the same building where he mopped floors 5 nights a week after everyone else had gone home. "This is your building," he said, stopping in his tracks. Ivy shrugged like it was nothing at all. "My mom works up top," she said. "Way up top. We live in the penthouse, technically, but she's basically never there, So mostly it's just me and Mrs. Alvarez. Nathan stared up at the tower's lit windows, snow swirling gold under the street lamps, and felt something cold slide down his spine that had nothing to do with the weather. You've been coming to school alone this whole time, he said. Nobody knows. Before Ivy could answer, a black sedan pulled slowly to the curb, and the same man in the charcoal overcoat from the school hallway stepped out, badge already halfway out of his coat pocket like he'd been rehearsing the motion the whole ride over. Ivy Whitmore, he said, voice smooth as poured concrete. And you must be the janitor. Nathan felt his jaw tighten instinctively, some old instinct rising up before his brain caught up to it. I'm Gordon Pierce, the man continued, extending a hand Nathan didn't take. I sit on the board at Coldwell Corporation, same board your employer answers to, which makes this conversation a little delicate for both of us. He smiled, but it didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. I understand you've been posing as this child's father at her school. That's a serious kind of fraud, Mr. Cole, and fraud has a way of ending careers. Nathan stepped slightly in front of Ivy without fully deciding to. She's a kid who needed somebody to show up, he said evenly. That's not fraud. That's just somebody showing up. Gordon's smile thinned even further. Careful, he said. Coldwell's shareholder vote is 2 weeks out, and a scandal involving the CEO's daughter and a hired stranger is exactly the kind of story that ends up destabilizing a company at the worst possible time. You'd hate to be the reason for that. He didn't wait for a response. He simply turned, got back into the sedan, and pulled away into the thickening snow, leaving Nathan standing on the sidewalk with his pulse hammering and Ivy's small hand gripping the back of his jacket like an anchor. He knows my mom, Ivy whispered. He's been trying to get rid of her for a year. If this gets out, it'll be my fault. Nathan crouched down to her eye level. It won't be your fault, he said. Not ever. That night, riding the elevator down to the maintenance level for his shift, Nathan couldn't stop replaying Gordon Pierce's voice in his head, smooth and threatening in equal measure. He mopped the marble floors of the executive lobby the way he did every night, alone under the hum of fluorescent lights, snow visible through the tall windows falling steadily over the sleeping city below, and for the first time in a long while, the silence of the job felt heavier than usual. It was past midnight when the elevator chimed and the door slid open to reveal a woman stepping out in a long charcoal coat, heels sharp against the marble, dark hair pulled back so severely it looked almost painful, eyes rimmed with the particular exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept properly in longer than she'd admit. Nathan straightened instinctively, recognizing her immediately from the framed photo in the lobby directory. Vanessa Whitmore, the CEO, Ivy's mother. She barely glanced at him at first, the way people who ran entire buildings rarely noticed the people who cleaned them, until her eyes caught on his name tag, and something in her expression shifted, sharpened. You're the one, she said, voice low and controlled, the kind of control that came from years of practice holding herself together in rooms full of men waiting for her to fail. My assistant told me a janitor's been showing up at my daughter's school pretending to be her father. Nathan set the mop against the bucket, choosing his words carefully. Your daughter asked me to, he said. She was scared of being embarrassed in front of her class. I didn't ask for anything except what she offered me, which wasn't much. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, cold in a way that made the temperature of the whole lobby seem to drop another few degrees. You took money from a 10-year-old, she said. Do you understand how that sounds to me right now? When you say it like that, Nathan admitted, it sounds bad, but I never planned on cashing it. He hadn't, not really, though he hadn't fully realized that himself until the words left his mouth. Vanessa studied him for a long moment, snow still drifting silently past the tall windows behind her, her expression unreadable, caught somewhere between fury and something else she wasn't ready to name. I want you to stop, she said finally. Whatever this is, it ends tonight. Nathan felt something twist in his chest, not for himself, but for the girl upstairs who had drawn a stranger's face onto notebook paper because she needed somebody, anybody, to show up for her. With respect, he said quietly, that's not really your call to make alone. Vanessa's a decision made without her daughter would just repeat exactly what Ivy had been running from her whole life. Invisible, managed from a distance, never actually asked. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed sharply in her coat pocket, and whatever she read on the screen drained the color slightly from her face. She looked back up at Nathan, some of the ice cracking just barely at the edges. We'll finish this conversation tomorrow, she said, already turning toward the elevator. Don't go near my daughter again until we do. The doors slid shut, and Nathan was left alone again with the mop, the marble, and the falling snow outside. The next afternoon, against every instinct telling him to stay away, Nathan found himself back at the diner with Ivy anyway, because she'd texted him from an old phone Mrs. Alvarez didn't know she had, and because some part of him simply couldn't leave her sitting there alone believing the deal had already fallen apart. She looked smaller than usual, shoulders hunched over a mug of hot chocolate she wasn't drinking. She said, "You have to stop," Ivy said. "Are you going to?" Nathan sat down across from her, snow melting slowly off his shoulders. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I know I'm not just going to disappear on you without saying goodbye properly, if it comes to that." Ivy's eyes glistened, though she blinked hard like she'd trained herself years ago not to let anyone see her cry. "Everyone always disappears eventually," she said quietly. "My dad did, before I even knew him. Then it's usually my mom's assistants, or nannies, or whoever gets tired of me." Nathan reached across the table, not touching her, just resting his hand near hers on the sticky formica. "I'm not everyone," he said, and he meant it more than he expected to. "Whatever happens with your mom, whatever happens with this whole mess, I'm not going to just vanish on you the way people apparently like to do around here." Ivy studied his face for a long moment, searching for the lie she was so used to finding in adults, and didn't find one. That evening, walking Ivy back toward the tower through streets already dusted white, they passed a small park where the fountain had frozen mid-spray into strange, jagged icicles, and Ivy stopped to stare at it like it was the most beautiful thing she'd seen all week. "It looks like it got stuck trying to be something," she said, "frozen halfway between water and ice." Nathan looked at it too, and thought quietly that it wasn't a bad way to describe most people he knew, including himself. They were nearly at the tower entrance when Gordon Pierce's sedan appeared again, sliding to the curb with practiced smoothness, a photographer stepping out from the passenger side this time. Camera already lifted before either of them could react. The flash went off twice, capturing Nathan's arm around Ivy's shoulders, snow catching in the frame like scattered static. "By tomorrow," Gordon said through his rolled-down window, "half the business page will be asking why Coldwell Sue can't be bothered to raise her own daughter." Nathan lunged forward instinctively, but the sedan was already pulling away, taillights bleeding red into the falling snow. Ivy's hands were shaking. "This is what he wanted all along," she whispered. "He's going to use it to get my mom fired. And if she loses the company, we lose everything, the house, the school, all of it, and it'll be because of me." Nathan knelt down in front of her right there on the icy sidewalk. "It won't be because of you," he said firmly. "It'll be because of him." Upstairs, in an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city slowly disappearing under a fresh layer of snow, Vanessa Whitmore stared at an email forwarded from her communications director, subject line already drafted for tomorrow's business section. "Coldwell CEO pays stranger to play family for daughter." Her hands, usually so steady in every boardroom she'd ever walked into, trembled faintly as she read it a second time, then a third. Her assistant, a quiet, kind-eyed woman named Priya who had worked for her for 6 years, knocked softly and let herself in without waiting for an answer. "You should see this before the board does," Priya said gently, sliding a folder across the desk. "It's everything Gordon's been building for months. Financial concerns he's exaggerated, personal narratives he's twisting, all of it timed perfectly around the shareholder vote. He's not trying to protect the company. He's trying to take it." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, the weight of the last 3 years pressing down all at once: the divorce, the long nights, the quiet apartment upstairs where her daughter had apparently been raising herself in every way that mattered while Vanessa fought to keep an entire company from collapsing under her predecessor's mistakes. "I've been so careful," she said quietly, more to herself than to Priya. "I thought careful was enough to keep her safe." Priya hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Ivy's not in danger," she said. "From what I've heard, that janitor's been showing up every single day this week. No complaints, no demands, nothing except actually being there for her. Whatever else this is, it isn't the scandal Gordon's trying to sell." Vanessa looked up sharply, something flickering behind her exhausted eyes that hadn't been there a moment before. "Get him up here," she said. "Now." Nathan arrived at the executive floor still in his work uniform. Snow melting off his boots onto marble he'd polished himself countless nights before, feeling entirely out of place among the glass walls and hushed, expensive quiet. Vanessa stood by the window when he entered, her reflection ghostly against the falling snow outside, arms crossed, posture rigid, though something in her shoulders had softened since the lobby the night before. "Sit down," she said. "Please." Nathan sat, unsure what to expect. "I read Gordon's plan," Vanessa said without preamble. "He intends to use my daughter's loneliness as proof I'm unfit to run this company, and unfortunately, unfit to raise her as well, which he'll use to push for an emergency guardianship review under the terms of her father's estate. If that succeeds, Ivy could be placed with my former sister-in-law, a woman who has never once asked about her, purely for the trust fund attached to her name." Nathan felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the snow outside. "That's insane," he said. "She's got you. She's got Mrs. Alvarez. She's got people who actually care." Vanessa's composure cracked slightly at the edges, just enough for Nathan to see the exhaustion underneath the ice, the years of holding an entire company together while quietly losing pieces of her own daughter she didn't even realize were slipping away. "I haven't been enough," Vanessa admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "And a man like Gordon knows exactly how to turn that truth into a weapon." She looked at Nathan directly then, something searching in her expression. "Why did you actually agree to this?" she asked. "You had nothing to gain." Nathan considered the question honestly before answering. "Because nobody ever agreed to show up for me when I was a kid either," he said. "And I guess I didn't want that to be true for her too." Something shifted in Vanessa's face, the ice thinning just barely, like the frozen fountain in the park, caught halfway between two states, no longer entirely solid. "We have 2 weeks before the vote," she said finally. "If Gordon leaks this story the way I think he will, I need it to look nothing like what he's painting it as. I need it to look like exactly what it actually is." She paused. "Would you be willing to help me prove that, publicly, before he gets the chance?" Over the following days, snow falling steadily over the city in soft, unhurried waves, Nathan found himself pulled fully into a world he never expected to touch. Sitting across conference tables from lawyers, reviewing statements from Mrs. Foley and the school counselor, gathering signed letters from neighbors and teachers who confirmed, quietly and without prompting, that Ivy had been slipping through the cracks long before Nathan ever picked up a mop bucket in her direction. Mrs. Alvarez, the housekeeper who had cared for Ivy in every practical sense for years without ever being formally acknowledged as family, broke down crying in Priya's office when asked to give a statement, admitting through tears that she'd begged Vanessa for months to hire additional help, that she'd watched Ivy eat dinner alone at the kitchen counter more nights than she could count, that she loved that little girl like her own and had felt powerless to fix what was broken around her. "I kept telling myself it wasn't my place to say anything," Mrs. Alvarez said, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve, voice thick with an accent that thickened further when she was upset. "Mrs. Whitmore pays me to clean and cook, not to raise her daughter, but somewhere along the way that's exactly what happened, and I never once heard a thank you for it because nobody was around long enough to notice." Priya reached across the desk and took her hand, saying nothing for a long moment because there wasn't anything adequate to say. When Vanessa read the transcript of that statement later that night, alone in her office with snow ticking softly against the window glass, something in her chest cracked open in a way board meetings and legal threats had never managed to. She had told herself for years that providing was the same as being present, that a full refrigerator and a paid tuition bill counted as love if you were tired enough to believe it. Reading Mrs. Alvarez's words in black and white made that belief feel suddenly unbearably thin. Meanwhile, Nathan's sister Karen finally answered his calls again, cautious at first, then warming as he explained everything: the school, the girl, the CEO, the board member circling like a vulture over a company and a family both. "Maybe you should bring Tommy by this weekend," Karen said eventually, her voice softening in a way it hadn't in months. "He's been asking about you. Says he misses his dad, even the version of you that smells like industrial floor cleaner." That Saturday, snow blanketing the sidewalks in fresh, undisturbed white, Nathan brought his own son Tommy to the small park near Coldwell Tower, and for the first time in months felt something like the shape of his old life returning, piece by piece. Ivy joined them uninvited, having spotted them from her window, and the two kids built a lopsided snowman together while Nathan watched, throat tight, thinking about how strange it was that helping one child had somehow led him back toward his own. Vanessa watched the whole scene unfold from the tower lobby. Having come down under the excuse of checking mail, she could have easily had delivered upstairs and stood silently near the glass doors for longer than she meant to, watching her daughter laugh freely in a way she hadn't seen in longer than she wanted to admit. Something in her chest ached watching it, equal parts grief for lost time and something warmer she didn't yet have a name for. Tommy, unaware of any of the tension surrounding the two adults who orbited his afternoon, packed a snowball with fierce concentration and lobbed it directly at Ivy's shoulder, declaring some kind of victory Nathan didn't fully follow the rules of. Ivy shrieked, delighted, and retaliated twice as hard. And for several minutes, the two children simply existed the way children were supposed to, loud and unguarded, and entirely unconcerned with boardrooms or custody hearings or business headlines waiting to break somewhere far above them. Nathan caught Vanessa's eye through the glass at one point, and instead of looking away or gathering some cool, composed excuse, she held his gaze for a beat longer than either of them expected, something unspoken passing between two people who had spent 2 weeks fighting the same storm from different angles. He raised a hand in something between a wave and an acknowledgement, and after a visible hesitation, Vanessa raised hers back, small and uncertain, like she was testing whether the gesture would cost her something. The night before the shareholder vote, Gordon Pierce made his move exactly as promised, the story breaking across 3 major business outlets simultaneously, headlines painting Vanessa as a negligent, image-obsessed executive who paid a stranger to fabricate a family for her daughter's benefit, conveniently omitting every fact Vanessa's legal team had spent 2 weeks assembling. Vanessa read the coverage standing in her office at midnight, snow falling thick and silent outside her window, feeling the ground shift beneath years of careful work. She called Nathan at nearly 1 in the morning, voice tighter than he'd ever heard it. "They're moving the emergency guardianship hearing up," she said. "Tomorrow morning, right before the board vote. Gordon's counting on both happening at once, so I can't properly fight either." Nathan sat up in the dark of his small apartment, Tommy's drawing still taped crookedly to the fridge in the next room. "Then we don't let him control the timing," Nathan said. "We show up ready for both." The next morning arrived cold and gray, snow still falling steadily, as if the sky itself hadn't decided whether it wanted to bury the city or simply watch quietly. Nathan stood beside Vanessa in a courthouse hallway that smelled like old wood polish and nervous energy, Ivy between them clutching her sketchbook to her chest like armor. Gordon arrived flanked by 2 lawyers, his charcoal coat immaculate, his expression already arranged into practiced concern for the cameras waiting outside. Inside the hearing room, a family court judge with tired, careful eyes reviewed the emergency petition Gordon's people had filed under the guise of concerned citizens, alleging neglect and unstable guardianship arrangements surrounding Ivy Whitmore. Vanessa's lawyer presented the folder of statements first: Mrs. Foley's letter, the neighbor's testimony, Mrs. Alvarez's tearful account, each piece chipping quietly away at the narrative Gordon had spent months constructing in the shadows. Then Ivy, without being asked, stood from her chair and walked forward, sketchbook open in her small hands. "I know this isn't really how this works," she said, voice steady despite the tremor Nathan could see in her fingers. "But I want to show you something." She held up a drawing, not the old sketch of an imagined father, but a new one, 3 figures standing together in falling snow, her mother, Nathan, and herself, none of them touching, but none of them alone either. "These are the people who actually showed up," Ivy said simply. "Not because a rule made them, not because a piece of paper said they had to. My mom works too much because she's trying to keep this whole company from falling apart so kids like me still have a house to live in. And him," she nodded toward Nathan, "he mopped floors every single night in this building and still had enough left over to show up for a kid who wasn't his." The judge studied the drawing for a long moment, then looked at Gordon's legal team with an expression that had gone noticeably cooler. "Mr. Pierce's petition references neglect," the judge said slowly, "but everything presented here today describes the opposite: a child surrounded by more people willing to fight for her than most children ever get. I'm dismissing the emergency petition." Whatever concerns exist about corporate leadership belong in a boardroom, not in my courtroom. Gordon's composure finally slipped, just slightly, jaw tightening as his lawyers gathered their papers in visible defeat. He turned to leave, but paused at the door, looking back at Vanessa with something colder than his usual polish. "This isn't over," he said. "The vote's still this afternoon." Vanessa met his eyes without flinching. "Then I suppose we'll see exactly what kind of company this really is," she said, and Gordon left without another word. That afternoon, in a boardroom high above the falling snow, Gordon Pierce stood before the assembled shareholders and board members, presenting his case for Vanessa's removal with practiced, cold precision, citing the morning's failed petition as evidence of instability rather than vindication. He nearly had the room, several older board members nodding along with his carefully rehearsed concerns, until the doors opened and Nathan walked in, still in his work uniform, Tommy's drawing folded in his jacket pocket for reasons he couldn't fully explain. "I know I don't belong in this room," Nathan said, voice carrying despite the tremor underneath it. "But I've mopped these floors for 2 years, and I've seen exactly who stays late fighting for this company and who leaves early plotting against it." He looked directly at Gordon. "You built your whole case on a story about neglect. But real neglect doesn't look like a woman running herself into the ground trying to hold everything together. It looks like people who use a child as a weapon to win a vote." An older board member, a silver-haired woman named Eleanor who had sat quietly through the entire presentation, finally spoke. "Gordon," she said, voice sharp with something between disappointment and disgust, "we've watched Vanessa rebuild this company from the mess your predecessor left behind, and today you tried to use her daughter as leverage to take it from her. I think this board has seen exactly enough to know who actually deserves to lead it." The vote, when it came, wasn't close. That evening, snow falling soft and steady over a city that felt, for the first time in weeks, a little less cold, Nathan found Vanessa standing alone in the lobby of Coldwell Tower, staring out at the storm through the same tall windows he'd cleaned nearly every night for 2 years. "Thank you," she said quietly, without turning around. "Not just for today. For showing up for her when nobody, including me, was paying close enough attention to notice she needed it." Nathan stood beside her, watching the snow gather in soft drifts along the sidewalk below. "I didn't do it for a reward," he said, "but it did give me a chance to remember what showing up actually feels like, which is something I'd stopped believing I was good at." Vanessa turned to look at him then. Exhaustion still etched around her eyes, but something warmer underneath it now. Something that hadn't been there the night she'd threatened to end his job over a hallway rumor. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. "Whatever this is, I've spent so long being careful that I forgot how to let anyone close enough to actually matter." Nathan understood that hesitation completely, recognizing it as the same wall he'd built around himself since the divorce, since Tommy, since every version of failure he carried quietly in his chest like frostbite that never quite thawed. There had been a version of him, years ago, who believed he was good at this, at showing up, at being someone people could lean on without fear of him vanishing. That version had disappeared somewhere between missed child support payments and nights spent staring at a ceiling instead of calling his own son back. Standing here now, in a lobby that smelled faintly of his own cleaning supplies, some old and familiar fear told him to take a step back before he disappointed one more person who mattered. Vanessa seemed to sense the retreat before he'd fully committed to it, and for once, she was the one who reached first, fingers brushing lightly against his sleeve. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," she said. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to stay uncertain about this with me for a while, instead of deciding it's already broken before it's even started." It was such a small thing to ask, and yet it undid something in Nathan that 2 weeks of legal battles and custody hearings hadn't managed to touch. "Maybe we don't have to know exactly how," he said. "Maybe we just keep showing up and figure the rest out as we go, same as everything else this month." Vanessa almost smiled then, the first real one Nathan had seen from her, small and uncertain but entirely genuine. "Ivy would probably say that's exactly the kind of thing someone in one of her drawings would say," she said. Nathan laughed softly. "Good. Then maybe I'm finally earning my spot in the sketchbook." Weeks later, snow still clinging stubbornly to rooftops, but the worst of the season's storms behind them, Nathan stood in the same small park watching Tommy and Ivy build another lopsided snowman. this one slightly less crooked than the last. His custody arrangement with Karen had eased considerably, weekends turning into weekdays as his life steadied under new footing. A promotion Vanessa insisted had nothing to do with anything except his own hard work, though Nathan suspected otherwise. Vanessa joined them slowly, a mug of coffee in each hand, offering one to Nathan without a word as she settled onto the bench beside him. "I used to think the cold was something you had to fight through alone," she said, watching the two children pack snow into place. Ivy always said winter felt honest to her, like it strips away everything false until only the real things are left standing. I think she might have been right about that. Nathan took the coffee, warmth seeping into his cold fingers, and watched his son and her daughter laugh together in the falling light. "Guess we'll find out together," he said, and Vanessa's hand found his on the bench, tentative but certain, the kind of hesitation that finally, quietly, gave way to something steadier underneath it, the way ice eventually gives way to spring, no matter how long the winter insists on staying. If this story stayed with you even a little, let us know down in the comments what part hit you hardest, because stories like this only keep getting made when we know they're actually reaching someone. This has been Winter Veil, where we tell stories about second chances, quiet kindness, and the people who show up when it matters most. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.